Decisions in life are two-way doors, meaning you can walk through them, and if you don't like what you see on the other side, you can turn around and walk back. But we build up every single decision as being a one-way door. First off, I think people need to treat life a little bit more like an explorer rather than feeling like you need to have the perfect plan.
Kids really want more than anything a deep level of connection, going down the rabbit hole with them, playing Legos or tea. Mostly it's about allowing them to feel connected to their emotions.
Creatine pulls water from the extracellular space into the muscle, and your muscle is mostly water, so that's a good thing. From the scientific side, I actually really love when we see a slight weight gain because it tells me that the muscle is saturated.
The brain itself, the most complicated machine known to humankind, more connections in it than stars in the universe, and that number is insane. 100 billion stars in our galaxy, and it's one of 100 billion galaxies. There's so much more to know about the brain.
You're listening to Be Well by Kelly LeVeque.
So my daughter and I, she was a junior in high school. This is the one who just finished her first year in college. Her name's Esme, and she was with a boyfriend. It was like her first serious boyfriend, and she was having some sort of dilemma. And I looked at her, and she's explaining it. I'm like, oh, babe, that's nothing to do with you. That's me. Like, I taught you that. But by the way that I parented you in the early years, I fucked up.
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't emotionally available. And so that's what's actually happening. And she looked at me, I looked at her, we cried for a bit. And then that pattern in her relationship just died. She just stopped it. And I remember thinking, it wasn't a thought that was particularly serious, but it came across my head and it went, oh, I wish I would have fucked up more so I could have had more of these moments. And so I say that just because when you're in the young years and you're thinking, oh, I fucked them up, you are going to fuck them up in some ways, but every one of those is an opportunity to like heal with them and to show them how to get back to themselves and to be vulnerable. So every one of those mess ups becomes an opportunity later in life. So, and with that, hopefully as a parent, I would have liked to have known that back then because I could have relaxed a bit instead of being so hard about it on myself, and in being hard about it with myself, that's probably where most of the mistakes came from, was that trying to be perfect about it. And so that's the first thing I would say about that. The second thing I would say is with my daughters, there's age-appropriate parenting. And, for the first 8 years, they're just on your vibes. I see parents sit down and say, okay, well, you should do this, and try to logic it out. Neurologically speaking, their logical mind is not on. They're not
online.
Yeah. Right, but it works sometimes because you're calm and so they're just moving off your vibe. So I think to something what kids really want more than anything, particularly their whole life, but particularly in those first 8 years, is connection, is a deep level of connection. And so that means going down the rabbit hole with them, playing Legos or tea or whatever that means, like being in their world. And it's also mostly it's about allowing them to feel connected to their emotions. And this is where I see, and this is Patty Whiffler's work. This is a book called Listen, an organization called Hand in Hand Parenting, changed my life. One of the most powerful spiritual practices of my life was parenting that way. And then the results for the kids are amazing.
Speaks for themselves.
Yeah, and the general, there's 5 rules to that, but the most important one is when they're having an emotional experience, allow them to have the emotional experience. Let them have their big emotions, and they'll get back into connection. So we would allow our kids to have big emotional movements, and then they never learned that any part of them was wrong. So to say, hey, Johnny, stop crying, that's telling them that their sadness is wrong. Johnny, settle down, that's telling them that their excitement is wrong.
Yeah.
Which ends up translating in their mind that they have to stop this emotional experience that they're having and that they have to control it, which has a whole bunch of emotional, physiological downside to it. interaction for the rest of their life. And you can literally see the way a kid holds themselves, which emotions they're not being allowed to have in their home. And so for me, it was about allowing them to have those big emotional experiences. And my favorite story about this is I'm at Whole Foods. I live in a somewhat hippie town. It was more hippie then. And my eldest daughter wanted something on the shelves, and the classic. And I was like, yeah, sweetheart, we're not going to do that. And she starts throwing a fit. And so I'm on the aisle of Whole Foods. She's like having a tear, screaming and yelling. And I'm like, all right,
sweating.
I'm right here. I'm like a little self-conscious.
Yeah.
And this old hippie woman comes by. She's like, are you okay, dear? Wanting her to stop. And my daughter, 3, something like that, looks up and goes, I'm just having my emotions.
Yeah.
And then just goes right back into it.
Yes.
And it was like this amazing, and they would have these big arcs of emotion, and then they would come right back to connection and were fantastic. But and I learned this from my wife to do this, if I was controlling their emotions, then it would just be this little in the system until they could have that emotion out.
Yeah.
Physiologically speaking, like let's do a little bit of science and then bring it into the moment, and then we'll talk about the effects in life. So physiologically speaking, it's just really detrimental to your whole system. The physiological responses of not feeling your emotions is pretty significant. And I could go into the deep science about that, but instead it's just easier to do this, which is try to stop feeling everything right now. Right? That's stress. Your body has to constrict. Your muscles have to tighten. It's like it is stress. And so it has all the negative effects that stress has. If I'm in an airplane and a kid starts crying and I'm at the front of the airplane, I can get up, look back in the airplane. I can tell you who wasn't allowed to cry as a kid by how upset they are by the tears of the child. So the reason that the practice with my children was so emotionally, like it was such a huge practice for me, was because every emotion that I wasn't allowed to have, I needed to sit in loving attention of them having it. And so sometimes I had to go off and rage or whatever I had to do, cry, so that I could get to a place where I could sit in loving attention of their temper tantrum or their tears or their fear or whatever it was. And so that's why it was such a profound practice, because it healed where I wasn't allowed to. And I was like deeply not allowed to cry. Like they used to take pictures of me when I was crying, put it in the photo album, play pity parties, the whole thing. And my story was that I was like, I haven't cried in 14 years. When I saw this picture in the family album, I was like, that's probably why.
Yeah.
And so I put it on my desk and I was like, I'm going to learn how to cry. And a year and a half later, I still hadn't cried. So I lived in Los Angeles at the time, and I would drive up to, this was before the kids, but I would drive up to like Andrews Crest National Forest, and then I'd hike into this place, and then I'd hike off trail, and I would fake cry because I was so ashamed of crying, and I needed a place that I felt safe, but I didn't know how to do it, so I just faked it. And then 3 or 4 months of doing that, finally real tears broke through, and I literally cried for like 4 days straight. I could stop if I wanted to, but I didn't want to, and I just got years of tears out of my system.
Anger feels scary to kids, or anger feels heavy when it's a work relationship, or, like that's a big emotion to feel.
Anger typically doesn't feel heavy unless directed at you.
Okay.
So if you say to your kids, oh, I see you're angry, let's go get angry.
Yeah.
And you go and pound a bed together.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah.
Yeah,
literally.
Totally. I mean, boys. Yeah. They're like, let's go.
Yeah. We were literally at this retreat that we were just at. We were in a place where there's other people, which is typically not what we do, but we couldn't fit 120 people. And there was a mom that walked by. We had one of the women was staying out of the emotional work because she was pregnant.
Okay.
And I thought that was a great idea.
Yeah.
I was glad she was taking care of herself. But this mom comes by with her 2-year-old.
Yeah.
And there's huge anger going on in the room next door. And she's like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Oh, they're just releasing some anger. And this 3-year-old kid's like, we could use that. Knew it right away.
Yeah.
So the anger at somebody is very different than if it's just anger. And so that's something, even that shows the fear. So when our mind is in a state of fear, we start binary thinking. So it's either do this or do that, buy the car, don't buy the car. It's not, there's 500 different cars I could buy. I could buy a used one. I could buy different colors. I could buy a different model. It's all sorts of different options that don't come out when fear is there, because fear is binary thinking. And so most of us are so scared of anger that the binary is either have anger or don't have anger. It's not have anger out in the woods, or have anger in the car when you're parked where no one can see you, or have your kids come into the room and everybody get angry together.
Yeah.
And so typically that's the way it works in anger, is that if it's actually moved without attacking somebody, without the person who you're angry at,
Yeah.
then the anger dissipates very quickly and you get right back to connection. And then you show up into the thing. But what happens is that there are the people that are angry, who have that tendency to angry. I was definitely one of those. And for them, it's an act of vulnerability. And what is actually happening is, I feel all alone and nobody here is going to help me.
Yeah.
And then the person across from me gets scared and leaves. And I'm like, see,
Yeah.
I proved this. And I remember when my wife, we were learning this together, and my wife looked at me. I was like, I'm angry. She was like, I'm so glad you're angry.
Yeah.
And I went, my whole system relaxed because I could be met. Like the whole anger dissipated because I could be met.
Because no one's running and they're holding your space for you.
I'm being held in my anger, because for me, my anger wasn't a vulnerability. You have plenty of connection in your life, but there's a lot of people who don't have that level of connection. Mm-hmm. And without that connection, we become very stressed. And the longest study that Harvard ever did, and I think that longest study in the United States, where they just tracked young men over years, and like I think JFK was part of it or something, but they basically said long life, less stressed, best happy, most happy, all of that is determined by connection, by how much connection that we have. And so we think that the stress is everything that we have to do, but it's those three things. And if you work on those three things, the stress starts coming down. You don't worry about having to keep it together or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And your kids are providing you this like beautiful place to at least deal with one of them,
right?
If not all three. And so every time they're crying, it's like, oh, there's my emotion that I'm not letting out. If it's bugging me, let's go. Let's do this thing. Yeah. And you have that moment, you take that space the same way you would take space for exercise or making your shake. And then on the other side of that is less and less stress through the day.
When Chris and I first met, he gave me this container, which felt like the most pure, and it still does. And it's we have children and life is happening, but the most pure container of I could do no wrong, mm-hmm. Love.
Yeah.
That I probably need to tell him this or make him listen to this. It's just my whole business was built on whatever I lacked in my own self-worth, or he helped me see my worth.
Yep.
And my abilities and my potential.
Yeah.
Really in a way that I felt that container in my house. My parents, I'm really grateful for the family system I grew up in, and I'll bet there are flaws, I'm sure, and looking at the way that people parent now and how things have changed, and what was allowed or not allowed, or all of those things and layers. But it was enough connection, a container to feel my feelings and love, that for some reason, I think when I got into adolescence, I had that base layer, but you have these fears or lack of self-worth, or I don't know, maybe you just, I think maybe I work better in a connected families type of unit. And so when Chris and I were building our little family, the two of us, I felt like I was limitless. I felt I'm going to start this other business. I'm going to go back to school. I'm in a, sky's the limit. Anything I think will manifest.
Yeah.
And that was in a state where I had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
I had I didn't have children. I didn't have a mortgage. I didn't have a house. I didn't have, I hadn't built a life. I was living in a rent-controlled apartment with one Toyota Tacoma from my dad's tow yard that was given to Chris and I when he quit the law firm and wanted to write movies. And we were just like dreamers dreaming big,
Yeah.
And it's amazing how much in flow you can be when you don't have, or when you just feel that way. Yeah. And I thought it was because I didn't have to pay bills or like didn't have to do those things. But I think it was just the way we looked after each other when we didn't have all these other things to look after or humans to look after, when we really were so deeply connected and checking in on each other.
So my question to you would be, I'm sure Chris is a great guy who loved you incredibly well, but I'm also sure it pales in comparison to the way that your boys believe in you.
Yeah.
So my question would be, what makes it that you don't feel that from you? Like, how did your boys become an obligation instead of a
container of limitless
3 people
believing in me?
Believing in you without question.
Yeah. I think this is maybe it's a fear that I don't feel. Like, I think almost like it's too good to be true.
Right.
Like, it just feels like, oh.
Yeah.
Woo, I knew this was going to happen. Like, I'm like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Yeah. I'm just like, I don't deserve this. Like, yeah. Like, I know I worked really hard. I know I sacrificed. I know there was like so much like grit and resilience in the early years. Like, yeah. But I think it's like, what's come back to me, like, there are moms that like had the same birth as I had with Sebastian and like didn't have the same outcome. Like, there are people who have this role reversal of like what is traditional here that have had like relationships fall apart. And like, I'm sitting here like married to my best friend with 3 healthy children. And I got to build, I got to build a house. And I'm like, I'm so afraid that something bad is going to happen.
Yeah, it is. There's no way you're living your life without something bad happening.
I know. And I think, Chris really, I think for men too, it's like they provide and protect.
And it's not going to hurt less when it does because you're doing this.
I know. I know. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I just throw myself into like the to-do list and I don't feel.
And my guess is the feeling you're not feeling is actually excitement.
Yeah, I definitely have lost that a little bit because I'm scared.
Yeah. What I'm saying is I think you're repressing your excitement, so it's coming out as anxiety.
Okay.
So I'm saying something a little bit different. Yeah. So like take the thing that you don't have to keep this on the camera if you don't want to.
No, okay. I'm really open actually. Okay. I'm like, cool. I think it's hard for me to be open on Instagram and stories, looking at myself on the camera, you know? And that's kind of like why I love the podcast.
Nice.
Is because like, I don't go back and watch it or listen to it and I don't really care, Great. Like I don't.
Me too.
If people are going to give me a 1-star for, or like, I don't know, like I just am like, this feels good for me to be a megaphone for people who help people.
Yeah.
And I get the most out of it. Like I love to learn and I love to grow and.
Then let's do it.
Okay.
So oftentimes when we're anxious, there's just a repressed excitement. So there's 2 kinds of fear. One kind of fear is like, oh my God, I'm going to die. One kind of fear is I'm walking into a bigger room, speaking on a bigger stage, asking to take a bigger space. And I love the thing, I think it's the Jewish word for humility is taking your God-given space.
Okay.
So it is an act of humility to actually step into that.
Yeah.
You can feel, I felt that in your yeah.
Yeah, I have like a big goal.
Yeah.
And I have a big I have a big thing I want to do.
You're already doing a big thing.
I know, but I just like...
Even that is a way not to feel the big thing that's happening right now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you're having a positive influence on hundreds of thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a dream coming true that you never probably ever thought was possible.
Mm-mm.
So what is it just to say? So think of the thing you're most anxious about. What's some of the thing you're most anxious about right now? I saw that little smirk.
Well, a couple things come up. Like I think the anxiety is like I'm with my family is like I'm missing it.
Cool. All right. So just think about that. And then it's an odd little hack. It works 80% of the time. Okay. Just say, I'm excited 10 times, but feel the excitement.
I'm excited. 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 I'm not counting. I'm excited.
Great. And now how do you feel about your family?
I'm excited. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of our anxiety, especially the anxiety that is stepping into the bigger room, is just excitement that we're not allowing ourselves to feel. Because if you really allow a feeling of excitement, there's less of you. Your identity starts to crack.
Okay.
Like the identity becomes more spacious, less something that has to be defended. So it's like, whew.
Can you explain, is that because I'm like, when I'm saying I'm excited about my family, I'm going to be more connected to other people and less just me? Or is it like, what's happening that?
Yeah. Neurologically, what I understand.
Just took a deep breath. Now I need some water.
Take your time. Yeah. Neurologically speaking, those two things are wired very closely to each other. And so just the way I was saying anger when it's kinked one way, kinked another way, excitement when it's kinked can be anxiety. And so unkinking it is just like actually allowing yourself to feel the anxiety and the excitement without any hesitation, without any holding on.
What if?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so that's one of the things that's happening. But the other thing that's happening is so somewhere in our systems, if you got excited as a kid, it was calm down. Right? And you know what it's like as a parent. Kids get super excited. You're like, oh, I just need to calm down. And so that's where it was trained in all of us, almost all of us, like, oh, hey, settle.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there's that. It usually happens between the ages of 0 and 8. So that's when we're trained because of theta waves, like brain waves. That's when we're trained. But there's also just and then our brains are really cool in the fact, like our intellectual brains will tell us we can't be excited because the other foot's going to fall.
Yeah.
Right. It tells us we can't be sad because it's going to last forever. You can't get angry because you'll destroy what you love. You can't be scared because you'll be less capable. But in reality, the crying actually makes you feel better. It doesn't last forever.
Yeah.
Anger actually provides clarity. It doesn't destroy things unless you get angry at people.
Mm-hmm.
And feeling fear actually makes us more capable.
Yeah.
Like, so Navy SEALs, if they're under attack, their whole thing is breathe deep, feel your body's sensation, like be in and present with the fear. That actually makes you more capable. And so what we're doing is we're saying, I don't want to feel anxious. I don't want to feel fear. Push it away, which makes us less capable and less capable and less capable. Whereas if you're like, oh, hey, anxiety, fantastic.
Yeah.
I can't wait to feel more anxiety. Yeah. This is an amazing thing. Like, it's here to teach me the excitement that I'm not feeling. It's here to teach me the boundaries that I'm not drawing. Typically, if you're anxious, there's a way that you're not taking care of yourself, and there's a way in which you're not feeling excitement. And so every time you're anxious, it's a direct signal to that information, and it's like awesome.
It's such a paradigm shift to be able to like redirect and say, like, what am I not feeling? What was I not allowed to feel? I think you just touched on it, was like people are afraid to feel sadness because they feel like it's never going to go away.
Yeah. The emotion that we're trying not to feel, we invite in the exact way we're trying not to feel it. So, for instance, anxiety.
Yeah.
This may pertain to you.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel the anxiety, so I'm going to do all the stuff on my list. But then I've done all the stuff on my list all day, and now I'm feeling really anxious because my nervous system is hyped.
Yeah.
Right? Or I'm going to try not to feel sadness, so I am going to stop my child from having the full emotional experience, which is going to have them more disconnected, which is going to leave me in this kind of low-level sadness all the time. And so the way that we try to push away the emotion is almost always the way that we're inviting that experience back into our world. And so if you can actually love the emotion, I cannot wait to feel anxious.
Yeah.
And you have that experience and you bring it in. And it's very much like working out.
Yeah.
Right? What do you mean lifting 200 pounds is something I can look forward to? It hurts.
Yeah.
Well, you can still look forward to it, as it turns out, or playing tennis or any of those things. And it's the same with the emotional experiences. And there's a ton of science that shows that if we lean into our emotional experiences, it's healthier, but it also prevents us from recreating patterns. So almost always what I see is, let's say you had a girlfriend when you were in your 20s who kept on dating the same guy. He had different driver's license, different names, but it was the same guy.
Yeah.
Like and typically that happens because there's an emotional experience they don't want to feel completely. And as soon as they feel it completely, then that pattern stops. Obviously, I work with a lot of CEOs who have this experience, right?
Okay.
Self-reliance. And one of the things that I notice is they're the hardest people to help. That I fell into this category for a long time as well, which is helping me was really difficult to do.
Mm-hmm.
One, because I looked like I had it all together.
Mm-hmm.
Two is, I would make sure was this right? Was it done correctly? So I wouldn't let people make their mistakes. And so that also made it harder to help me. I needed a certain level of control. That made it harder to help me. There's all sorts of things that I did to prevent that feeling. And for me, there was a lot of helplessness that needed to be felt. And neediness, like that whole kit and caboodle of emotion. Yeah.
Super, Joe.
Super great. And one day in your future, you'll be like, oh, I feel needy. This is great.
Who can I call? Yeah, I'm like, it's just cultural, Joe. We all feel these feelings.
That's true. That's also true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or we all just don't feel these feelings.
Yeah, we all don't feel these feelings, and we just kind of like try to trudge.
We started to tackle this in the lab with first looking at across the menstrual cycle to really start to understand how might some female sex hormones impact the ability to utilize creatine, and more importantly, with our natural fluid fluctuations, how might that be impacted? Mm-hmm. And so when we look across the menstrual cycle, and there's multiple phases, but if we simplify and say the follicular phase, essentially when you're menstruating, and the luteal phase right before you menstruate, kind of when women feel they're the least best. And we also have
super
more
sexy.
Yes, more fluid retention. Mm-hmm. There's also some data that maybe it's harder for women to recover and perform during that phase. We wanted to say, okay, how might creatine impact that? Mm-hmm. And there was some really interesting findings, and this is in naturally menstruating women. So in that luteal phase, creatine seemed to pull more water from the extracellular space into the cell, which can be really helpful, especially if you have any sort of edema or a little extra fluid, a little puffiness in that luteal phase. It helped pull it into the cell. The other really important part is if you have more intracellular fluid, it does create an environment that might optimize increases in muscle. Okay. We did not test that in that study, but we did look at performance changes, and creatine helped improve performance in the luteal phase as well. So like across a normal female kind of hormonal fluctuations, there does seem to be some benefits beyond just what we would see in a more hormone neutral environment in the follicular phase. And I always connect that's very similar to how if we would study a male, kind of baseline flatlined hormones. And so I think that leads us to have more foundation of what happens as our hormones continue to fluctuate through pregnancy, through perimenopause, into more of the back end flat line into postmenopause.
I think the most well-known side effects that people complain about of creatine are like GI-related side effects and what they call water weight. Can you explain what is actually happening when you take creatine, what the fluid is, where it is, and why it's important?
Yes. Okay. So I think one of the things that there's more clarity now, but still misunderstood. So creatine, and the most widely studied is creatine monohydrate, which is creatine plus a water molecule. Yeah. And so creatine with the water molecule essentially pulls water from the extracellular space into the muscle, and your muscle is mostly water. So that's a good thing. Yeah. It often brings other things with it. It often brings glucose with it. But if you have higher doses of creatine, so let's say more of our loading phase, our 20 grams a day, it does pull creatine into the cell along with water. That in itself is great. It helps prevent things like dehydration. But if you hold a lot more fluid, and people are more responders versus non-responders, you may, with a loading dose, hold more fluid, which if I were to step on a scale, most women only see about a half a pound of increase in body weight. And we actually evaluated that across the menstrual cycle. Without creatine, most women see about a half a pound upwards to 2 pounds of increased weight in the luteal phase, coming mostly from fluid. With creatine, it was about half a pound more than placebo, really no difference. And you typically don't see that with the lower doses. So I also, from the scientific side, I actually really love when we see a slight weight gain because it tells me that the muscle is saturated and it dissipates within a couple days. So it tells me that this muscle is actually uptaking the creatine just like we want it to.
That's great. It sounds like a good sign that it's working.
It is, exactly. I don't know. And it's not like this massive weight gain. I do think the GI distress and the weight gain is good to talk about because every woman is different. And I think it's really powerful for a woman to like understand her body, which is if you start taking creatine, I would be observant. And if you are more responsive, that's a good thing. You can always kind of see, oh, it is working for me more than others.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned loading phase, and I think I want to go down dosing, and because all of these studies are, coming out, they're studying different quantities, they're loading, they're not loading, the design is all over the place. And then, the woman buying creatine is like, so how much do I take?
Yes.
Can you talk about the different ways that you can load or not load and dosing and
so it all comes down to, like from a scientific research perspective, there's a reason that the doses are different. It's because we were trying to evaluate something in a tightly controlled manner. And so oftentimes we will use a loading dose because then it only takes me 5 days in the lab to see those increases. So a loading dose is 5 grams 4 times a day for 5 to 7 days. And the literature there is very comprehensive for decades to say that will increase muscle creatine for most people. Now that level of saturation can vary across a person. So in a lab, if I'm doing a research study, I want to ensure that I have that loading phase if I'm going to test the effects of creatine. So we would do that short dose. You don't need the loading phase. There's other data that suggest a lower 3 to 5 gram daily dose will also increase muscle creatine stores. It will just take a little bit longer. So 2 to 3 weeks to see the same increases in muscle creatine.
Everybody listening is like, yeah, okay, loading dose.
Well,
5 to 7 days. I'll get there and then we'll rock and roll and see how it works.
I mean, if a woman comes to me and say, I'm really interested in taking creatine, I would say, okay, well, what kind of benefits are you wanting to see, and what does your lifestyle look like? Are you like me with an 8-year-old who's up at 4 a.m. and I want that benefit quickly? Then it does allow you to see, does it work for me in a short-term effect? Like I don't have time to figure it out. And so that loading dose does allow me to see, how does my body respond? Now that's on an accelerated, like, okay, you might hold a little bit more in the muscle muscle. You might, have a little bit more energy, but then you go to a maintenance dose. Or if someone's like, oh, I've been taking creatine for a long time, or I want to start and I don't want to do the loading dose, a daily dose of 5 grams is also very effective. You might just not see the results as quickly. It's more subtle. By body recomposition, we're seeing not a ton of changes in body mass, but changes and an increase in muscle measured by DEXA and PQCT, which is basically a CT scan, and decreases in fat mass. And with that PQCT, we're also seeing a decrease of intramuscular fat. And so really, we're seeing this really important body composition change. We've also started to see some really cool changes in bone. Wow. So bone takes a really long time to build. So I'm not going to put my feather in that cap, but a trend beyond measurement error of increase in bone, not only from whole body DEXA, but from PQCT. And so some good pilot data to say we might actually be able to help these midlife women with bone before we start worrying about it in postmenopause, which is typically when we're allowed to get that information.
Yeah.
We also have seen changes. We're doing some cognitive markers and some improvement in cognition, which is also really cool.
So that leads us right into all of the brain health, mood, sleep deprivation. What are we seeing from that standpoint when it comes to supplementing with creatine? And you can start with your cognition piece on your study and kind of tell me what else you're seeing in the literature that you're excited about.
Yeah, so the initial data, a lot of it was driven by Perry Renshaw and Dr. Eric Rawson of creatine supplementation really helping in sleep-deprived individuals. So I'm thinking military. Yeah, well, right, they didn't think about women, right? Yeah. Even college students. Yeah. And so creatine doesn't tend to impact brain and mood and sleep in well-rested individuals. But when you think about the groups that are the most sleep-deprived, I think about moms.
Yeah.
And then you think about changes in sleep and duration in perimenopause due to hot flashes or whatever it may be. And so when you think about the application, creatine has been shown to help with sleep. Actually, a recent study by Dr. Ann Brown, after resistance training, on the days that women resistance trained, creatine helped improve sleep duration and quality. We have creatine stores in the brain. Our brain uses ATP just like our muscles. And so creatine has also been shown now more that it can help with brain energy and focus and cognition.
Yeah, I'm even seeing studies linking it to improvements in Alzheimer's patients, which is just it makes sense when you think about it's something that supports energy production and fast energy production, and your whole body needs energy and produces energy depending on what that organ needs or what that muscle needs or whatever. It's kind of amazing because I poo-pooed it for so long in high school and was like, no, I'm not going to do drugs.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Uh-huh.
Steroids.
Yes. Yes. Uh-huh.
But it's just amazing. So I did see too, that their safety studies are great. People can take it at any age. What would you say is a sweet? Obviously, perimenopause is a great time to take creatine, but what about for kids, teenagers, elderly? What do you think about the safety of creatine? And
can we go back to the brain studies real quick?
Yeah.
Just because there are 2 brand new studies that are really relevant. Okay. You mentioned the one in Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And it most recently, as a group out of Kansas, showed that creatine supplementation helped improve Alzheimer's brain benefits, which is really hard to do.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that it's working and the results were very surprising, need to be replicated. But then also most recently, there was a paper just published by Dr. Sergei Ostajic out of overseas, and he has shown that a lower dose, 1.5 grams, they use creatine HCl, also improved cognition in perimenopause. It was the first perimenopause study, which just really highlights this idea that with changes in hormones and the changes in our brain, we're not crazy, that creatine might help more. in those brain benefits. And so I just, the science is growing and developing, and there's a lot of benefit. And then you bring up the side effects, which is really important, and the safety. There is very minimal risk. The only things to consider is if we go back to the fluid changes. Creatine does pull water from the cell, extracellular space into the cell. So if you take creatine and you're dehydrated already, it doesn't have a lot of water to pull from. So often you want to increase fluid. I know, yes, and most of us need more water anyways. So I wouldn't say at risk for dehydration, but it definitely won't work as well. Depending on what you're taking your creatine with, there's many other things and products, and that can accelerate GI distress. That's one thing people will feel. Or if you think about water pulling into the cell pretty quickly, maybe some bloating. Not super common, but it can happen for some people. And I typically say go back to the source and what are you mixing it with. And then a lot of people talk about increases in creatinine. So creatine is produced in the liver. It will slightly raise creatinine, but so will eating meat. It's not to a massive level. It's a slight increases in creatinine just from pure liver creation.
Okay. So now you bring me to another topic, which is obviously like we can take creatine as a supplement, but like our liver produces creatine and creatine is in certain proteins. Like what's the split? Like when people are eating an animal-based diet or include animal-based foods like fish and red meat or, and then they also have their liver doing a job and then say potentially they're supplementing, like what does the split look like? And who benefits the most from supplementing with creatine?
And I think this is one of the most important questions that doesn't get enough light, is that I think you and I both are very much a whole foods first approach. I also didn't used to believe in supplements, but creatine is one of those that it's very difficult to get the amount in your diet. So 5 grams of creatine, 1 teaspoon, I would have to eat about 2 to 3 pounds of meat or fish on top of my daily intake to get that 5 gram amount. I don't know about you, but some days I barely get enough of my baseline. And so it's really about optimizing and maximizing. And I like to think that I have a pretty good prioritization on food, and it's still difficult to get. And then when you think about a lot of people aren't eating as much red meat, or it's harder to get high quality fish, or then you transition into vegan and more plant-based approaches, which are great, but missing that animal protein component that provides creatine. And when we think, there's actually some really cool data that I got to be a part of looking more at NHANES dietary intake across the US. And most women are not getting enough creatine in the diet, well below, which has been associated with some menstrual cycle negative effects and kind of ovarian effects over time, which really tells me, okay, even if you do eat enough animal proteins, that supplementation can really supplement the diet in a very positive way.
And in such an easy way. It tastes like nothing. It's like a teaspoon. I put it in my coffee. I don't taste the difference. I mean, talking about, like you just mentioned earlier, like mixing it with things can make it an issue, taking it when is the best time to take it? I mean, I may just totally be like, you're going to be like, don't put it in your coffee. I mean, what can we put it in? When should we take it? Morning, noon, or night? Like, are there different benefits based on the time of day? I mean, you're telling me a loading phase of 20 grams, split up 5 grams 4 times a day. Does that like lower side effects? Like what's the whole...
How to take it away? Okay. Well, I would say the most important is that you take it every day. Consistency trumps everything.
Everything, right?
Well, so I mean, I think that is the first thing I would say. Don't worry about when to take it. If you really want to optimize, and we didn't add this into the dosing of like, let's say you don't want to do a 20-gram dose or you've been taking 5 grams. Some of the newer research coming out shows that like a 10-gram dose might be better for brain and or bone. And so like for me, I typically take 5 to 10 grams at a single dose. As far as time of day, what do you want the benefits to be? So kind of general rule of thumb, it doesn't matter when, but if we try and optimize, post-exercise is one of the best times you can take most things because your muscle is like a sponge. You've just wrung it out and now I'm going to fuel it and it's going to saturate it and refuel kind of more quickly. If I want the brain benefits, creatine tends to peak a couple hours, 2 to 3 hours after you consume it. And so I took some creatine before I came to make sure my brain was firing. I take it before I teach. I also see a lot of people have this because of the brain energy. Sometimes it does cause this. It's definitely not a stimulant effect, but it does cause a little bit of an energy in the brain. So I often will take it in that afternoon slump when I am feeling really sleepy and I don't want caffeine. So, there is no time or not to take it, but finding a time, there's a lot of honing in what benefits that you want. Creatine has really shown to help maintain strength and immobilization. Some really cool data. And when I think, maybe I'm the only one, but I keep getting these random injuries. And that's the next study is to look at how hormones impact some of our muscle stiffness into perimenopause. But I think creatine has a lot of benefit around, like we know exercise plus creatine is really important. But when you take a scenario where your exercise volume goes down, or you are immobilized. There's some neat data that shows that doing a loading dose post-surgery and having creatine within the muscle when you go into PT, it can help increase strength faster and muscle faster than baseline.
That's so interesting. I also, and I don't know if this is just a theory that I have in my brain being that my parents kept me really active as a kid. Like I'm really grateful that I played a sport, like a team sport, that I lifted, that I went to the training room, that I I played soccer pretty seriously. And I think about like that base level of just muscle and body composition that I had at a young age. And I feel like I've had bouts where, whether I'm pregnant and I'm like, not be able to do the same things I used to do, or I have a knee surgery or an injury, I do feel like there's something about having that base layer and then being able to get back from and recover from that, or like have your child and be cleared to work out, or, in that 8 weeks prior or after, and to lift again. I feel like muscles come back so quickly. Is there something there?
Yeah, I mean, that's pure physiology. Yeah. And I mean, that goes into training age. Of that, there's a lot of mitochondrial changes, but also down to muscle fiber hypertrophy and just motor unit recruitment. So when you're not using it, we can have some detraining effects. But it absolutely will come back faster if you have that kind of neuromotor control. And absolutely. And I think pregnancy is such a cool thing. Like I always say, it's the most athletic event you'll ever do. You should train for it. And so when you think about that piece of like, you might not be training the same, but yes, postpartum is also, okay, how do you kind of get all of those things firing again in a way that supports obviously holding a child, but your mental and physical health? There's a lot of really cool physiology around it.
So we talked about physical benefits of creatine. We talked about the Alzheimer's effect, mind and mental. Can we talk a little bit about like any of the studies you've seen in regards to like mental health or depression, anxiety, any of that kind of, and how and why that might be supportive?
Yeah. So a couple things to think about. Across the menstrual cycle, particularly in the luteal phase, there are changes in anxiety and depression. That's hormonally related. And then we see that elevate into perimenopause because of those repeated fluctuations. So first of all, if you're perimenopausal and you have increased anxiety, depression, that's normal. And then what the literature is showing with creatine is it does help more with antidepressant effects and anti-anxiety and mood when there is some sort of subclinical depressive symptoms. And even there's some data that shows when combined with an SSRI, the effects are better. And so I hypothesize it comes back to brain energy, ATP stores. And so creatine is one of those really affordable things to try of like, if you're seeing changes in your mood, I would do a slightly higher dose at 10 grams. There may be some potential benefits with very minimal side effects. And if you are already taking an SSRI, it still might have better benefits. And so the other window that we haven't spent much time on, but that the other time we see a big brain changes is postpartum. Maybe I blocked that out intentionally. But especially the postpartum depression. Creatine can be potentially beneficial for the mom, but also if you're nursing or for brain and fetal kind of not only development, but postpartum.
I mean, that makes perfect sense to me because postpartum is this like amazing soup of like your hormones totally crashed out. You're up every 2 hours. You're majorly sleep deprived. And if you are nursing, your body is working overtime to produce food and fuel for your child. Wow.
If someone wants the benefits fast, I say, okay, try a loading dose. And then if someone, doesn't or wants to do sometimes a slightly lower dose can help. So 1.5 grams twice a day versus the 5 grams.
Okay. So split it up.
Yeah, split it up. The other thing that is the creatine monohydrate is where most of the science is, but there are different types. And so Alzchem, based out of Germany, they tend to have the highest quality. And so sometimes if someone is experiencing bloating, I often say, okay, what are you taking it with? And what type of creatine? So just more going back to the quality and then taking it with nothing else, just to see. And then if you're having symptoms, I would say it's rare, but every person that matters is it could respond differently. So there's some different strategies of even when you're taking it and dosing wise. The other interesting thing that I think is really valuable is when you take it with carbohydrate, it can help with muscle glycogen repletion. But like maybe you don't want that. So then take it, by itself. So before giving up, I would say like, is this part, like what is the rest of your diet? And is this like the next component? There are some things to see and it's worth trying for a pretty low price that outweighs any sort of, bloating gas.
It's funny that, it's nice that you bring that up because I I do have creatine on my supplement line and I do pay a premium for Alzchem and I use their new Crevitalis, which is their super micronized version. And I was going to just go with Creapure, but then I got really excited about the micronization just because I noticed a difference in like my GI side effects and it's known for absorption or whatever. And I mean, there's a lot of people that are like, look for NSF certification or third-party testing. And I think all of that's really important. But I just loved that they got their raw materials from in Germany and they source, everything sourced basically and made in-house versus like coming from all over the world and we don't really know how it's being made.
Absolutely.
Control the controllables in my mind when it comes to simplification of our products. Like I just am always like the most minimal. I'm not going to add things. And you see people adding taurine or fulvic acid or all these things. And I'm like, the studies are mostly just on creatine monohydrate. So I'm just going to keep it as what it is and try to get the best source and see where it goes. So,
well, right. And the micronized helps with the kind of dissipation. You can put it in your coffee. It's not always at the bottom of your cup, which is great. And I think quality is important, especially when we're talking about giving it to, during pregnancy or postpartum. There is an element of knowing where your materials came from is really important.
I mean, this whole business, my whole supplement business, which I didn't, for 8 years, I talked about like making a smoothie. And then, I got pregnant with Sebastian and I was like, wait a second, I'm not going to take this protein because it may have heavy metals. And I'm not going to take this protein because I don't know what cows they're using. I'm not going to take this protein. And then I was like, shoot, I got to make a protein powder. So it's kind of how it's evolved. And now I basically just make my essentials, like the things I mostly take. I like to know what's on, I like to know the cooks in the kitchen and then like get in there on the recipe. You know what I mean? So, anyways, all that to say.
Well, I haven't tried all your products. I'll have to. Yeah, I did. You have some great products, all of the essentials.
Yeah, we have an essential amino acids too. And we source it from Japan. And it's fermented, and leucine rich and studied, which I really loved.
Yeah. We do a lot of work with essential amino acids.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, like that's what we're doing in our fed versus fasted.
Okay.
Is most people are talking about eating carbs before training.
Yeah.
Which is great if you need the, carbs.
Energy or whatever.
But we're looking at a lot of times protein or amino acids pre-exercise versus fasted.
Okay.
Because of some of the changes in metabolic flexibility and just increasing protein synthesis.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy to me that like lifting weights, obviously lifting heavy, you can get that muscle protein synthesis, but also just like an amino acid blend with a specific amount of leucine. And all of a sudden you're seeing that. Yeah. It was, I don't know. It was like 1.5 grams of our essential amino acids is the same as 40 grams of whey
protein. Of a protein shake. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like for a lot of people, like chugging a 40 grams of whey protein prior to working out. It's like GI side effects, burping, bloating, like all that is just not the same as just like put a little something in your water and then all of a sudden you're getting the same benefits. It feels great. But that was it wasn't that I couldn't get my hands on essential amino acids. It's that most of them came with natural flavors, artificial flavors, a lot of malic acid. And I was just like, I don't want the other stuff.
Yeah.
Give me just the amino acids.
Yes.
So I know it's hard though, because it kind of tastes like burnt hair.
Well, that's why you mix them with some seltzer or put them in your yogurt or whatever. Yeah.
I'm going to start using all your tricks.
Well, I'll use yours too.
That dislocation between the external perception of how things are going and how you feel things are going is such an interesting scenario to find yourself in. And really at the start of COVID into the end of 2020, I started to feel that in such a pronounced way that from the outside looking in, I was winning the game. I was doing the things that you're told you should want to do, like make money, get the promotions, bonuses, the titles, like the fancy things that you're told represent what a successful life looks like. And under the surface, internally in my own life, I had started to feel like a lot of things were falling apart. My relationships, most importantly, I was living 3,000 miles away from my parents, not really seeing them ever. My relationship with my sister had ground to a halt. My wife and I, unfortunately, were struggling to conceive at the time in the middle of this 2-year infertility journey, which was causing a lot of strain. I was drinking 6-7 nights a week. My mental and physical health were in a bit of disarray. And so I had started to feel all of these cracks forming in my own life. And it was this weird juxtaposition of, from the outside looking in, you're winning the game. And then me feeling like if this is what winning feels like, I have to be playing the wrong game. And it all came to a head for me in this one conversation with an old friend in May of 2021. We sat down for a drink and he asked how I was doing. And I told him that it had started to get difficult living so far away from my parents on the East Coast, that we were 3,000 miles away, that I had noticed for the first time in my life that they were getting older. They were slowing down. They weren't, going to be around forever. And he asked how old they were. And I said mid-60s. And he asked how often I saw them. And I admitted that it was down to about once a year. And he just looked at me and said, okay, so you're going to see your parents 15 more times before they die. And that was the moment that changed everything. Because in that moment, I had the gut punch realization that my entire definition of success, of what it meant to build a wealthy life, had been incomplete. That I was focusing on the one thing at the expense of everything else. And my wife and I decided to make a change. The next day, we had a conversation, and within 45 days, I had left my job. We had sold our house in California, and we had moved 3,000 miles across the country to live closer to both of our sets of parents. And that one decision was the spark that changed everything, that led to this book, that led to this entire journey that I've been on to share these ideas, because in it was this realization, which is that you are in much more control of your time than you think. That number, 15, is now in the hundreds. I see my parents multiple times a month. They're a huge part of my son, their grandson's life. We had taken an action and reassumed agency in our life, realized we could take an action and actually create a desired outcome. And when you do that, it starts making you view the entire world differently. You start measuring the things that actually matter to you so you can take action to actually go and create in that regard. There's this idea that I think I originally heard from Jeff Bezos, which is that most decisions in life are two-way doors, meaning you can walk through them, and if you don't like what you see on the other side, you can turn around and walk back. But we build up every single decision as being a one-way door, as in you walk through it and you can never go back. Most of these leaps of faith, these things that we characterize in our minds as, this enormous leap, we think of them as one-way doors when in fact they are two-way doors.
Yeah.
You can walk through and you can treat it like an experiment. You can make this big change, and if after a year or two it hadn't worked out, I hadn't been able to build a different life or business, and it didn't make sense for us living there, we could move back. There's nothing fundamentally permanent about these decisions that we make. And so first off, I think people need to treat life a little bit more like an explorer rather than feeling like you need to have the perfect plan.
Yeah.
Planning is based on the expectation of order. It's like the idea that I'm going to sit where I am and have the perfect plan to get to the life that I want on the other side. And you're saying, oh, nothing's going to happen. I'm just going to plan perfectly exactly how I'm going to get from here to there. That is not how life works. Life is chaotic. Things happen. And so what I always try to say is focus on preparation over planning. Preparation is based on the expectation of chaos. You're saying, I'm going to be ready for whatever chaos is inevitably going to enter my life. And that's how I'm going to get to the general direction of where I'm heading on my journey. So that's the second thing I'd say. The last thing is functionally. When you are trying to make a leap of faith in life, the reason it feels so scary is because of this asymmetry, in that you have tons of information and evidence about where you currently stand, your ability to live your life, to pay your bills, have your responsibilities met, all of those things where you currently are. And you have none of that about what the other side looks like. And that just manifests as this huge gap, this enormous amount of fear, this endless expanse below you. And you can solve that problem by gathering information and creating a little bit of evidence of your ability to live on the other side of that, whatever it looks like. Conversations with people, getting your first customer for the side hustle, whatever those little things are, that closes this gap so that the leap of faith feels more like a step over a little ledge than a huge jump. I went out to lunch the next week with one of my mentors, and we sat down and I told him, I was like, yeah, I was going to work on this book. That was going to be my next big thing, but I sent it to this agent. And so now I think I'm going to pause it. And he just said, he had 2 words of advice that he had heard at an inflection point in his life that he was going to share. And the advice was this: nobody cares. And I was kind of perplexed. And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, nobody cares. Whether you win, whether you lose, nobody cares. You are so afraid of the judgment of others in these things that you hold yourself back from doing what you know is correct in those moments. You're not afraid of failure. You're afraid of what other people will think of you if you fail. But no one is really watching you. Everyone is just concerned about themselves. Right? We're ego-driven creatures. We just go around the world worried about our own lives and about ourselves. So even if someone's listening to your podcast and is like, oh, that, giggling and laughing, they've moved on 2 seconds later to whatever thing is going on in their life. So post the podcast, write the book, do the thing. And I was so lucky that he said those words to me, because the next day I sent it to a second agent who responded and said, I'm going to be honest with you. And my heart sank. I absolutely love it. And that was the agent I ended up working with. We signed the book deal 3 weeks later. And now 3 years later, the book is actually out in the world and impacting people's lives. But all because of those 2 words: nobody cares. If my definition of success had been incomplete, what was the proper definition of success? What was the more comprehensive, good life that I was trying to build towards? And I talked to and spent time with hundreds, now at this point, thousands of different people. And I asked people, what they were trying to build towards. If they were older, I asked them what advice they would give to their younger selves. And it was so interesting because these 4 common themes kept coming up across every conversation. Old, young people, different backgrounds, experiences, everything. And it was time, people, purpose, and health. Those were the 4 things that everyone said, common across the entire population. Money was sort of an enabler to some of those, but it was not an end in and of itself. No one said they wanted to be on a private jet by themselves. No. Like, that's not something people wish for. And so that was what started to formulate in my mind this idea of these 5 types of wealth. The 5 being time wealth, which is all about freedom to control, to choose how you spend your time, who you spend it with, where you spend it, an understanding of time as your most precious asset. Social wealth is about your relationships, the people that you love, the few close, deep bonds, and then your broader connection to circles that extend beyond yourself. Mental wealth is about purpose, it's about growth, and it's about creating the space necessary to actually wrestle with some of these bigger picture, more unanswerable questions in your life. Physical wealth, you know all about, is about your health and vitality, investing in the controllable actions on a daily basis to fight against the natural decay and atrophy that your body does go through as you age. And then financial wealth is the last one, the one we all know about when we think of wealth, but with the very specific nuance of focusing on your definition of enough. What it means to have enough financially, with the recognition that your expectations are your single greatest financial liability. Because if your expectations grow faster than your assets, you will never feel wealthy. The version of the life that you are trying to build needs to be an actual life, not a number. The thing that most people do when you ask them about what is enough, they come up with a number. You say like 1 million or 5 million or 10 million. Scientifically, numbers just disappear and reappear on the horizon. We know this. Michael Norton, this Harvard Business School professor, did this study where he asked high net worth people, worth anywhere from 1 million through 100 million plus, how happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Then he asked them, how much more money would you need to be at a 10? And across the board, whether people were worth $1 million or 100 million plus, they all said they needed 2 to 3 times as much money. It makes no sense. There should be a number where you just are happy, right? But that's not how humans work. Numbers disappear and go to 2 to 3x. But the life that you are trying to build, where do you live? What are you thinking about? What are you working on? Who are you with? Who are you surrounded by? That does not disappear and reappear as easily. My version of that is I feel wealthiest when I'm able to take my son in the pool at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday. That is my wealthy life. That is what enough means to me. So when I look at other opportunities, things that come my way, shiny objects, I need to recognize that it has to be very exciting if it's going to be something that's going to pull me away from the ability to live that life. Because I already have that. I can do that right now. So like an extra $10 million, it's actually not going to change that. And if it's going to make me travel, 100 nights out of the year, it's an absolute no for me because it does not contribute to me living my version of what a wealthy life looks like. But having a clear picture of what that enough life looks like, it doesn't have to be Spartan. It doesn't have to be bare. It can be amazing and brilliant and beautiful. But knowing what the life is that you are actually trying to build towards is essential. I think you need to understand what your absolute yeses are in life in order to say no.
Yes.
So what that means is, what am I absolutely saying yes to in my life right now? The main things for me, writing, I get a ton of energy from. I'm always saying yes to writing. New writing opportunities, creative opportunities, I absolutely love. Creating an impact around the writing, around the content, that's a yes in my professional life. My family, my wife and my son are an absolute yes. What that does, once I know my absolute yeses, is anytime a new opportunity comes around, I can ask myself the question, what would I be saying no to by saying yes to this new opportunity? Well, it would be these great things. I would be saying no to time with family. Any new opportunity that comes along that's going to ask me to travel, go do all sorts of things. I'm probably going to be saying no to time in the pool with my son this summer. Like this summer is going to be an incredible experience and time. I'm not going to be on the book tour as much. I'm going to be around. So if someone wants me to go travel somewhere for a week, for 3 or 4 days to go do something, and they're going to pay me a bunch of money, I have to ask myself, is that new opportunity exciting enough? Is it going to fulfill my purpose? Is it going to do all sorts of things that are going to make it seem valuable enough to say no to time in the pool with my son? So by having a clear picture of what you are going to be saying no to, by saying yes to the new thing, you can establish and actually enforce those boundaries much more effectively.
Yeah, you said something that piqued my interest about creating energy. You said that writing creates energy. How can someone start to look at their daily life and build a life that is energy producing and that they feel good about because they are protecting these buckets, whether it be their writing and their family? Like for me, it's definitely my family, and I'm also writing right now, and it's like those minimalistic tasks of saying these are the most important things to me. Like, how can someone start to assess what is draining of them and what is creating energy?
And it's so important. You referenced it earlier when you were talking about your life started to improve, your income potential, all these things started happening when you started leaning into things that were creating energy in your life, your purpose creating work. What I have always found is that outcomes follow energy.
Yeah.
When you are leaning into things that create energy, that applies to people as well. When you're leaning into energy creating relationships, the best things happen. When you're leaning into energy draining things, nothing good really comes from that. The first step is creating awareness, as you said, of what actually creates energy in your life, both activities and people. The way that I would do that tactically is an exercise that I walk through in the book that I call my energy calendar. So at the end of the day on a Monday, look at your calendar and color code activities according to whether they created energy, meaning you felt lifted up by them. You felt like an interest, a pull, a natural inclination towards them. Mark them green. If they were neutral, mark them yellow. And if you felt physically drained by the activity during or after, mark it red. If you do that for a week, you will have a very clear visual picture of a trend. The types of activities that create energy versus drain energy in your life. That is your starting point that you can then work from. It's like a canvas that you can then, over a period of time, try to make adjustments to things, to lean into the green and lean away from the red. And leaning away from the red may mean delegating things more. It may mean just full sail removing things from your calendar if you're able to, or adjusting things slightly so that the red becomes yellow or even green. You're never going to fully eliminate energy draining things from your life. That's not reality. But you can seek to improve the ratio of green to red, which will improve how you feel and it will improve the outcomes because outcomes do follow your energy. This is what I would view as the fundamental tension of being a parent in the modern era. It's this tension that exists between presence and ambition, if you will. Presence is this recognition that 95% of the time you have with your kids is over by the time they turn 18 years old. 75% is over by the time they turn 12. There is a 10-year window during which you are your child's favorite person in the entire world. And after that, they have new favorite people. They have best friends, girlfriends, boyfriends, partners, spouses of their own. And you never occupy that same place in their world. So there is this desire to be present during that window. But it also coincides with the period of time in your life when you are just starting to see the incredible compounding of all of the efforts that you put in over the prior 10, 15, 20 years. And that ambition and that desire and that responsibility to your family in a lot of cases to take care of them, to provide, those two things start to feel like they're in conflict. That's when we talk about work-life balance. We say it's work-life balance across these two things. That whole idea of work-life balance is fundamentally flawed because it places the two in this tension. It says that they are opposing forces pulling against each other. My perspective is that we should strive for work-life harmony. We should strive to create an environment with our children, with our partners, where we are all on the same mission. This work that I am doing is part of the mission of the life we are all trying to build together. So you are a part of that just as much as I am. My wife, after I found out that the book had hit the bestseller list, said she was proud of me. And I said, I'm proud of us. And I really mean that because it is part of a mission that we are all on together. The book would not have happened in any way without her involvement, without the push, without the guidance, without the wisdom, without her reading parts of it along the way. All of these things we are on together. So when it comes to the relationship with your kids, they have to understand that. They have to understand the why behind what you are doing. When you are working hard on something, your kids need to understand why.
Yeah.
Because them understanding that working hard on things that you care about is an important rule for life, an important principle, that is arguably one of the most important things that you can teach your children. My wife and I have been together since we were teenagers. We started dating when I was 15, she was 14. And we've been together the entire way through. So the number of seasons and changes in our personalities and who we were, our interests, our love, that we have seen each other through is just, it's remarkable to think back on. And there has been a strength of a bond that has formed around that because our love grew through all of these different changes and seasons of life. My wife and I are big on sort of silent acts of service, I would say. I think for both of us, it is these like tiny things, these tiny appreciations of the other person that are a big show of love in our household. So it's like these seemingly silly things, like, taking the trash out without being asked, or like filling the soap dispenser, like these things that seem so silly. But whenever we do them for one another, there is this like, we vocalize appreciation around it. And when our son was born, I read this survey that said that 80% of married couples said that their relationship got worse in the year after their first child was born. And I sat down and I thought about that. And what I thought about was, okay, how do we be in the 20%? And I like to invert problems, like this idea of like flip it on its head. So I was like, how would I make sure we were in the 80%? Like what could I do to guarantee that we actually felt like our relationship got worse? And the number one thing I came to was not vocalize appreciation for the other person. If I stop vocalizing appreciation for her in this year of all this change and this chaos, we're not sleeping enough, all of these things, I guarantee our relationship will get worse. Yeah. So what am I going to do about that? I'm going to make sure that every single day I vocalize appreciation, because lack of appreciation is where a relationship goes to die. So every day, both of us make an effort to say something that we appreciate about the other person. It could be the tiny thing like the soap dispenser, or it could be something big. But that has been an incredible relationship ritual for us that has really stood the test of time. I also just have this recognition. This is from my mom before we got married. My mom asked before we got married how I knew Elizabeth, my wife, was the one. And I told her that it was because I love doing nothing with her. And my mom was a little confused. She was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, well, I had this recognition by that point in our life that we want to assume that life is all about the glamorous moments, these big moments, the honeymoons, the filtered images, the fancy date nights, when the reality is that most of life is just sitting on the couch doing nothing. It is just the seemingly innocuous, simple, little moments. So when you find someone that you love doing nothing with, you've really found your person. That is your one. And we had this moment a few weeks ago. We were lying in bed. My son had fallen asleep on time, which is rare right now. And my wife just turned to me and said, "I love our little life." And I was reflecting on it later, and I wrote about it because there was something so powerful about that little statement. So much of what you were told is that you should be chasing these big things. Whether it's these grand ambitions, more money, more status, more things, all this stuff, vacations, fancy stuff. But the real beauty of life is found in the little. It's in those little things. And so when she said that, she vocalized this understanding that I feel we both have, this alignment that we both have around a gratitude for the present that is almost impossible to put your finger on, but is just so incredibly powerful when you feel it.
Diagnoses are made now as symptom clusters, right? You have a certain number of symptoms, you meet criteria for a diagnosis, and then most of the time that's going to be met with a prescription, and that prescription may or may not be super well thought out. Appointments are quick. And so that frustrated me. That's not really why I went into psychiatry. I didn't want to be just a pharmacologist. I wanted, again, to understand where this stuff was coming from and not just treat a symptom. And I have always felt mental health is brain health, right? Like ultimately the way we feel, how we think, the emotions that we have, our goals, our ambition, it all tracks back to an organ.
Yeah.
And that is the brain. And we don't think about it because we don't look at it. It's not visible. We spend more time thinking about things like skin and muscle than we do about our brain. And yet it drives everything. And so the Amen Clinics model fits that to a T, right? Because we're not just we ask lots and lots of questions.
Yeah.
We do observations, we do computer testing, but on top of that, we also look at the brain. And that's really called to me and translated to results. I mean, outcome measures when you actually look at the organ you're treating, dramatically better than when you're just guessing. The thing that you need to know about a SPECT scan is it's looking at blood flow in the brain. So the images we're looking at are not brain tissue in and of itself. It's not like an MRI or a CT scan. We're looking at blood flow, and blood flow tells you about activity level. Mm-hmm. So we look for areas where the blood flow is either higher than expected, that would be a hyperactive region, or lower than expected, that would be a sleepy region. And depending on the regions involved, it tells you a lot. You don't make a diagnosis just straight off a SPECT scan. You're using that in conjunction with everything else to gain further insight. So examples, prefrontal cortex, right? The very front of our brain that's responsible for focus and time management and organization and impulse control. In some types of ADHD, and we can talk about all the different types, but in some types, you'll see reduced activity there. Mm-hmm. And those are people who really benefit from things that stimulate dopamine. And they can harness the superpowers of ADHD while also learning to deal with some of the challenges. There's another part of the brain called the anterior cingulate gyrus, and it's located basically where my fingers would intersect, and that's our brain's gear shifter. And when it heats up, our gear shifter gets stuck, and then we get into the obsessing and the thought loops and the worrying and the replaying things in our mind. There's another part of the brain called the thalamus, deep inside the brain. When that heats up, the strength is we can be very intuitive, perceptive, deeply feeling, sensitive, but at the same time, we're more prone to challenges with mood state, like depression. That's 3. There's many, many more that we look at. And what's interesting is even though this technology is cutting edge, we're still scratching the surface. I mean, the brain itself, the most complicated machine known to humankind, more connections in it than stars in the universe. And that number is insane, right? 100 billion stars in our galaxy, and it's one of 100 billion galaxies, more connections in the brain. So even though this is cutting edge, it's still scratching the surface. There's so much more to know about the brain. Yeah. And brains aren't stuck. Like, they're not stuck when we're kids. They're not stuck when we're adults. They're not stuck when we're in a geriatric age. Brains can change. And that's what we tell people, right? You're not necessarily stuck with the brain you have. No 2 brains are the same. Mm-hmm. Every single brain I've ever seen, I've seen thousands now, they're all fingerprints. No 2 are exactly the same. And knowing your fingerprint is really helpful because then you can really leverage your strengths because everybody has them, right? We may not be fully aware of them, but everybody has them. And you can smooth out the rough patches and then ultimately improve the overall health of your brain. I'm really in the business of taking awesome people and making them feel more awesome. Like that's how I see myself. Most like CEOs, doctors, lawyers, I mean, anyone who's had to grind to get to where they are, they almost always have a hot anterior cingulate on their skin. The flip side of that, though, is they can be perfectionistic, ruminative, obsessive, sort of feeling like a rat is running on a wheel in their brain, And so that's what I'll tell people. If I see that finding, I'll say, especially if it's a kid, for example, I'll tell the parents, your kid is wired to be persistent and strong-willed, and that might make you want to pull your hair out now. Mm-hmm. But down the road, that could be a good thing too. We just have to know how to drive this machine.
Right. So when you are, that would be invaluable information for me as a parent. Like, how do I sign my boys up? How do I sign my whole family up? amenclinics.com. Yeah, no. But
email me and text me.
Yeah. So when you're looking at that and you're seeing like these different parts of the brain that are hot, or would you call them cold?
Yeah, I would say
like cold. Lack of blood flow. Is that what we're talking about?
Reduced blood flow. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about like the frontal lobe, for example. Mm-hmm. I remember and my audience knows this because if they've listened to the episodes where I talk about being diagnosed with ADD as a kid, I was in 3rd grade And I remember my mom saying, like, you have lack of blood flow to your frontal lobe, so concentration can be difficult for you. In reality, like, I'm in 3rd grade, Johnny's talking behind me. I'm really like extroverted and social. I'm not paying attention to the teacher at all. I'm easily distracted. But when I'm focused, I'm like, let's go. Yeah. I could be in this book for hours. It feels like 5 minutes. And I've talked about it being my superpower. So what is it about, like, when you're looking at SPECT scans, do you see a hot frontal lobe or a cold? Because that seems circumstantial to me.
Yeah, no, it's such a good question. So, and so much to say about that. So first off, ADD, it's now all called ADHD. It's just a silly terminology thing. What used to be called ADD is now called ADHD inattentive type, which is way less efficient. But,
how many words can we add to this diagnosis?
Exactly, make it more complicated for people. Yeah, that'll help them understand. But ultimately, what ADHD is, it's not actually a disorder of focus. That's a common misconception. It's really a challenge of modulating focus. So like you just said, people with ADHD, they can hyper-focus better than anyone in the world. They could dive into something for hours and hours and hours if they're interested, if it's motivating, maybe if it's a time crunch, whatever the situation may be. Because in that state, their brain is generating more dopamine than it normally would. And the prefrontal cortex runs primarily on dopamine. Mm-hmm. So if we have ADHD, and I do myself, by the way, but if we have ADHD and we're doing something boring, low dopamine state, prefrontal cortex doesn't have the fuel that it needs. 2 minutes feels like 2 hours. Yeah. And suddenly flip the switch and we can hyper-focus. And for a parent, it can be confusing because you could be looking at your child saying, well, you're able to play video games for 5 hours. Why can't you do your homework for 5 minutes? And it's not that the child is choosing to or being, disobedient or defiant or whatever else. It goes back to neurocircuitry. So I love that you said ADHD superpowers, because I personally, even though it stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, I think it's so poorly named because it's really not a disorder in my mind. It's a different way of being wired. And I mean that very honestly. 1 out of 8 kids has ADHD. And if you think about where does ADHD even come from, there's evolutionary theories that would say, when we were more primitive versions of ourselves, the person with ADHD is the one scanning the environment and spots the saber-toothed tiger before it gets everyone. Yeah. Or it's the person who is motivated on the hunt and doesn't come back unless they come back with an animal. So that wiring...
Maybe me too.
That wiring is advantageous to us as a species. But then you take that beautiful brain and sit it down at a desk and ask it to listen to a teacher for 8 hours. It's a mismatch between wiring and environment, which is not really a disorder. What I tell kids is there's going to come a time where you get to pick what you want to pick to do. Yeah. And you can unleash that brain, right? Yeah. And match it up to something amazing for you. In the meantime, the environment is not going to radically change. So let's work on strategies to help you get everything you can so that when you do have the opportunity to do what you want to do, you've got plenty of choices. For a kid who has ADHD, where it, let's say, hasn't been diagnosed, the message that kid receives, by the time they're 12, they've actually gotten like 20,000 pieces of negative feedback compared to a peer without ADHD. And it's things like, why aren't you focusing? Why didn't you understand? You forgot to turn this in. And each one might not be with malintent, but 20,000 adds up. And the person ends up feeling like self-esteem has taken a hit. And then people start feeding themselves things like, well, I'm not smart enough or I'm not good enough. And the reality of the situation is ADHD and IQ have nothing to do with each other at all, right? Mm-hmm. That being said, if you take someone with ADHD and sit them down for a 3-hour IQ test that they're not into, they might not score that great. But then if you treat that same person for their ADHD and have them take the same test, they're going to score higher. They're not smarter now. Mm-hmm. They're just demonstrating it the way it's being measured. Right. So knowing that, I think, is really important because especially for girls with ADHD who maybe aren't stereotypically running around the classroom, causing big problems, they don't get called out by the teacher and then they don't get assessed. And so they internalize a lot of that. And then you see anxiety, depression, self-esteem issues. Yeah. And a lot of times people end up coping with it, sometimes perfectionism, right? Like, I don't want to make more mistakes, so I want to be perfect about everything. Or people pleasing too, like I don't want people to be disappointed in me, so I'll say yes to stuff, even if it's not in my best interest. In our work, we've actually described 7 different types of ADD/ADHD. So there's the classic type, hyperactive, impulsive, inattentive only, anxious ADHD. And in that type, what you'll see in a scan is deep inside the brain, there are these regions called the basal ganglia, which are basically our fight or flight centers. And in someone with anxious ADHD, those areas are raging. And it's not necessarily that their prefrontal cortex is having a hard time keeping up. It's that the background noise is so loud that it drowns out the prefrontal cortex's ability to lock in and focus. So if you take that person and put them on a stimulant, how's that going to go? It's like lighter fluid for those basal ganglia. Yeah. They feel more anxious and jittery. Maybe they focus a little better, because if anyone took a stimulant, they'd probably focus a little better, but they feel awful, right? And so that's the person who goes and tries Ritalin and it doesn't work. And then the doctor says, well, let's try Adderall, and it doesn't work. And they think, what's going on? It's a different type. So anxious, overfocused ADHD, that's a person with a really active anterior cingulate. So they really have a hard time shifting their attention, more so than even just classic ADHD. So again, for that type, you need things that soothe the brain, not necessarily just stimulate it. Then there's limbic ADHD. That's a person who is so depressed that it's impacting their ability to focus. When we're depressed, the brain sends more blood to the thalamus, and there's only so much blood to go around, so the prefrontal cortex sees less. And so for a person like that, supporting the depression side of things is also going to be really important. Temporal lobe ADHD, that's where the temporal lobes on the side, right by the temples, go down in activity. And those you can think of as our emotional bumpers. And so when they go down, this is a person who has a really hard time containing emotion. So they feel things very quickly, very deeply. It's hard to come back to center, and the emotional regulation piece is like key. And then the final one, I think I hit 7, but you can let me know.
Maybe even more.
Is ring of fire ADHD, which sounds dramatic because it looks dramatic on a scan. Basically, the entire brain looks lit up, like a fireworks show. And these are people who are struggling with several symptoms: inattention, hyperactivity, emotional regulation challenges. And again, for that type of person, a stimulant might not be the way to start. I'll start with nutrition. There was a recent study that came out of like 200 kids. The only intervention that they did was really locking in nutrition. These are kids with ADHD. 70% experienced significant improvements. And I've had some patients where I present a plan. There might be like 10 different things on the plan. We start with nutrition, and then we don't need to get to number 3, 4, 5, 6 because they see such significant improvements. So everybody is different, and obviously people should consult with their pediatrician. But generally speaking, the things I tell people to avoid: refined sugar, for sure. You were alluding to this. Blood sugar spikes and crashes are the enemy of all brains, but especially ADHD brains. You don't want to run on a blood sugar spike because a crash is going to follow. You're going to be dopamine depleted. It's going to be that much harder. And the ups and downs also generate inflammation in the brain, which doesn't help anything. The way I think about inflammation is, if there's a hot spot in the brain, it makes it hotter. Cold spot makes it colder, right? So it just exacerbates everything. So refined sugar, gluten in many cases, especially in the US, our household is gluten-free. There's just so many curveballs with gluten that even if someone doesn't have a pronounced sensitivity or an allergy to it, I think it's generally a good idea to cut out for most. And then processed foods, just the rule of thumb, and you've probably said this on your podcast, if you can't pronounce the ingredient, if you couldn't buy that ingredient by itself at the same store that you're shopping in, probably not good for your brain, just as a rule of thumb. And then I also think about food sensitivities. So a lot of people are walking around with undiagnosed food sensitivities, and it's pretty easy to get testing on that. And sometimes it's something you would have never expected, like a peach is the thing that ramps up inflammation in someone's brain. And so cutting that stuff out for a solid month and then reintroducing it to see if there's a change can often be helpful. And then for most people, there's exceptions, but for most people, I recommend like a Mediterranean style diet. So plenty of lean proteins, like you were saying, chicken, turkey, eggs, wild-caught salmon, bison, lamb, plant-based, all of the good lean proteins. Starting the day and ending the day with lean protein, critical for an ADHD brain. The worst breakfast in the world for ADHD is a bowl of sugary cereal.
Oh, yeah.
Best, couple eggs, avocado, some blueberries, something like that.
Yeah.
But, so lean proteins, healthy fats, you also said that. The brain is 60% fat after you take the water out, so fat is good. So nuts, seeds, avocado, coconut, assuming no allergies. For oils, I typically recommend avocado or olive, and usually not really anything else.
Yeah.
And then fruits, vegetables. I tell kids to eat the rainbow every day, but not Skittles. Right?
Yeah. Pro tip.
Pro tip, not Skittles. Some fruits are better than others. Some fruits are higher in sugar, have a higher glycemic index, like pineapple, mango, grapes. So trying to do more of the lower sugar fruits.
Right.
And then complex carbs, like sweet potatoes and quinoa, millet, wild rice. That helps keep your serotonin level up, which for many of those types of ADHD we talked about, serotonin is the calming neurotransmitter. So if you've got an area that's overactive, serotonin is very helpful. So generally, that's what I'm recommending for nutrition. As a parent, I know it's a lot more work to do this, right? I mean, it's a lot of effort to try to think about everything so meticulously, but at the same time, if it's optimizing the health of someone's brain and maybe it helps them perform better in school, maybe you avoid medication, it's an investment, right? It's an investment. And I think it's, in my mind, 100% worth it. But I also empathize with parents sometimes who have the 3 kids who have ADHD, and maybe they have ADHD themselves, and then suddenly there are all these new things to be thinking about. And I tell them, you don't have to build this in a day, right? Start with a swap, right? They like chicken nuggets. Let's find a brand that's easier, or not easier, but a brand that is equally easy but healthier.
Yeah.
And then just slowly roll it out. You don't have to build it in a day.
How are you making an impact on their physical activity? Because that's a hard one to change.
Yeah. So for adults, I'll tell them, for most adults again, so there's no one recommendation fits all, but for most adults, I'll tell them to start with 20 minutes of cardio 4 days a week and start with whatever intensity they feel comfortable with. The goal is to work up to sweaty, wouldn't want to have a conversation, heart pounding cardio for those 20 minutes. Because 20 minutes 4 days a week is equivalent to what an antidepressant does in our brain. It increases serotonin to a similar extent, but instead of side effects, the side effect is fitness and
being jacked,
exactly.
Being ready for spring break in summer.
That's the side effect. So generally, that's a starting point for adults, and then some strength training to maintain bone density and muscle mass and these things, longevity. For kids with ADHD, sports are often the way to go because it's going to be harder to have a kid go around on a treadmill for 20 minutes. But I have 4 sports that are my favorite for ADHD. One is swimming. Okay. Swimming does so many good things for the brain. I mean, you get the cardio, but you also get bilateral movement, which basically activates a part of the brain called the corpus callosum. It's right in the middle, and it helps integrate a lot of sensory information, which is great for ADHD. Swimming, fantastic. Soccer is also great, as long as people aren't doing headers.
Okay.
Consecutive headers can actually show up on a brain scan. So soccer with no headers.
Okay.
Martial arts, if you've got a good sensei, like a discipline, coordination, there's definitely plenty of cardio there. And then tennis. I absolutely love tennis for ADHD for a few reasons. One, you've got the cardio piece for sure. But 2, any racket sport requires a lot of coordination. And when we're engaging in things that increase coordination, we're activating a part of the brain in the back called the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is actually hardwired to the prefrontal cortex. So not only are you getting the cardio, you're also indirectly boosting the prefrontal cortex specifically. It depends on the stage or the age that they are. As younger ages are obviously going to require more sleep. Teenage years, the biological clock shifts, and teenagers actually are wired to stay up late and sleep in late. Unfortunately, schools aren't wired the same way because they're run by adults, who have a different wiring. So as a rule of thumb, the things I recommend to all ages, including adults, you definitely want to shut down the screens an hour before bed. Our brain does not know how to differentiate light from a screen versus light from the sun. And we've all, well, maybe not all, but many of us have fallen asleep to a screen before. And you can do that pretty well, right? You can scroll through social media and nod off or watch a show. The issue is you don't get into deep sleep the same way. And so sleep is critical to brain health. It's not your brain doesn't turn off when you're sleeping. It's actively cleaning itself and consolidating memories and forging new pathways. So you want to get into deep sleep. So screens, one issue. Another is people spend a lot of time in their bed when they're not sleeping. And there's this concept called sleep efficiency, which is basically the number of hours that you're sleeping in bed divided by the number of hours in bed. And that ratio, if it's anything less than 90%, our sleep quality is poor. So the way to improve it is spend less time in bed unless you're sleeping, right? So only be in bed when you're sleeping. And so that's a big one for like teenagers in particular who often do their homework in bed or talk on the phone in bed or things like that. So that's a big one.
That makes sense.
And then for adults, I tell them wake up the same time every day. Even if it's a weekend, a holiday, just do your best to, with some flexibility, wake up at around the same time each day, get sun on your face. It turns out that when you wake up is more important for setting your circadian rhythm than when you go to sleep. For most people, it's hard to get the right amount of omega-3s from diet alone. And there's plenty of research to show that if you take someone with ADHD and you give them an omega-3, like fish oil or an algae-based omega-3, compared to a placebo, the people who get the omega-3 do better. And omega-3s are good for so many other things too, skin health, joint health, heart health. So it's hard to get that just from diet alone. And if you are trying to get it from diet alone, you start worrying about things like mercury. And so, so omega-3s typically would be one thing I would think about. Dosing depends on age. A brain-directed multivitamin, so even if ideally you're getting all your nutrients from food, and that can also be difficult. So having a multivitamin on board, from a good, trusted brand that's third-party tested. And oftentimes vitamin D, it's worth checking. Low vitamin D is associated with difficulty with concentrating, brain fog, low energy, low mood. And a lot of people are running with really, really low vitamin Ds. So those are just basic starting points. Then I'll often use labs to inform where a specific nutrient deficiency is. And so you think about that. And then in terms of things that are helpful for ADHD, again, this is not for everybody, but these are things I'm thinking about. Pycnogenol, which is a pine bark extract that actually reduces inflammation in the brain and has been shown in studies to help with ADHD. I think about things like ashwagandha, ginseng, rhodiola, decaf green tea extracts. For some people, paraxanthine, which is not necessarily for younger kids, but it's a metabolite of caffeine. Okay. So caffeine in and of itself, not great for brain health. Too much caffeine.
Wait, what?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
We're gonna circle back to that in a hot second. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I can go on a tangent like no one else. But too much caffeine constricts blood flow to the brain. And so while it gives you the initial up, again, inevitably there's the crash or the jitters or the insomnia that goes with it. Paraxanthine is a metabolite of caffeine, And it gives you just kind of like a smoother, cleaner experience without the crash, without the jitters, doesn't tend to cause insomnia. So again, maybe like for an older kid, teenager, certainly adults, I use paraxanthine, not infrequently. A lot of parents with kids who have ADHD want to know, like, either why is my kid conflict seeking, or why does my kid lie? Conflict seeking, because when you're in conflict, your brain is generating more dopamine. And it's not that you're sadistic and you want to fight. It's that the ADHD brain has a harder time extracting itself from that because it gets into that hyper-focus mode, right? And then for lying, kids with ADHD who might lie, it's because they weigh the immediate reward over the long-term consequence. They have a hard time playing out the tape. And then when they're confronted with it, there's all the shame and, self-esteem stuff that goes with ADHD and the desire to get out of it because I don't want to get in trouble again. Yeah. And so then, the lie appears.
Fascinating. Holy cow. So do you think because I like caffeine that I'm like that makes sense to me. I'm like, I want that immediate feeling right now versus like, I'm going to be depleted later.
I think if I had to guess, you're ADD type, and maybe we'll do another episode where we look at your scan.
Hey, we'll bring the team in. We'll tape the SPECT scan. We'll get the results. I'll share. I don't care.
My guess is you probably have a combo of that like inattentive and anxious type ADD. That would be my guess. But I could be wrong. Yeah. Interestingly, I have more of like the sort of like combined to like inattentive, impulsive, hyperactive. If I drink a cup of coffee before bed, I'll sleep like a rock. And that's often a clue for some people with that more classic type of ADHD. It's not necessarily that you feel jacked on it. You can feel more focused and alert, but you also feel calmer at the same time, and you could easily go to sleep. So if anyone has that experience, you might have ADHD.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Be Well by Kelly LeVeque podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a review in your favorite podcast app and subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. We're also excited to share that full-length video episodes are now on YouTube and Spotify, so you can watch along as you listen. The best way to support me and the show is by sharing it with your friends and family. Your recommendations make all the difference. This is a Wellness Loud production produced by Drake Peterson. The video is recorded by Luke Rodriguez and edited by Jesse Trout. See you next time.
The content of this show is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for individual medical or mental health advice and does not constitute a provider-patient relationship. As always, talk to your doctor or healthcare team first.